Our reading today is from the book of Job, chapter 11. It's quite short. Can you fathom the mysteries of God? Can you probe the limits of the Almighty? They are higher than the heavens above. What can you do? They are deeper than the depths below. What can you know? Their measure is longer than the earth and wider than the sea. Please take a deep breath with me. May we open our eyes, our ears, our hearts, and our minds to these words from our spiritual ancestors. May we take them, learn from them, hold them, and see what happens. Amen. Human beings are stuck. Human beings are stuck. Even after a few 100,000 years of being anatomically modern humans, we still find ourselves unsure of our place in this world. Are we part of the world? Or do we have control of the world? Or both? Or neither? Human beings seem to be stuck in that tension of being and being more than at the same time. Even after layered and multiple revolutions of tool-making and art, religion and culture, industry and war, peace and technology, we still may not know who we are. We may think we know our place when we look at our lives in the micro, in the day-to-day experiences that we create for ourselves, but when we step back, when we look at the whole in the macro, do we know who we are? We are animals, mammals like a cat or an elephant, a dolphin or a chimpanzee, but are we like them? Do you and your dog cohabitate as equals? And if you do, tell me how that works. So if we are both like an animal and yet different from, where does that put us? Who are we then? Are we set apart from the rest of the living things? Are we different than? Are we closer to God? We are capable of creating like God. We can begin to understand and unravel the deep mysteries and complexities of the universe. We can cause destruction on a massive scale and alter the face of the earth to fit our desires. Humans alone have eliminated and caused the extinction of 680 vertebrates in the last 400 years alone. This is Hebrew Bible level destruction that we have caused. So, are we animal-like or are we God-like? Yes and no. We are both and we are neither. We are animal in that we are born and we grow, we require food and shelter and care, we get sick, we experience death. We are biological creatures like all other living things, and we are capable of that which no other living thing is capable. We are stuck in this tension, in this liminal space between biological and divine proximity. The 20th century theologian Reinhold Niebuhr put it this way: human existence is obviously distinguished from animal life by its qualified participation in creation. Within limits, it breaks the forms of nature and creates new configurations of vitality. This double belonging that we find ourselves in can be complicated. Any paradox or tension comes with some amount of stress, and my hope today is to not alleviate that tension. Sorry. In fact, I wonder if that tension born of mystery is actually a good thing for us to remember as we make decisions and as we build relationships. We are both animal and more than animal. So how does remembering that change the way that we consume, the way we build or tear down, the ways that we care for or don't care for each other? So I wonder if this small passage from the Hebrew Bible book of Job can remind us of something that is central to this human tension of being both created and able to create. And that is our imagination. Human beings are, as far as we know, the only biological creature that have the capacity to imagine. The capacity to conceive of what has not yet existed. This is central to our ability to create, to be creative, to understand and expand knowledge. Imagination is the jumping off point of the building of anything new, be it physical or conceptual. Imagination is also foundational to the way that we speak and have language and understand each other. Congregational minister Henry Ward Beecher once wrote, "The soul without imagination is what an observatory would be without a telescope." To even understand that analogy, we need our imaginations. So Job's friend asks him, "Can you fathom the mysteries of God? Can you probe the limits of the Almighty? How big is your imagination?" he wonders. Is your imagination as big as God, as expansive as the very ground of being? Only our imaginations can even engage these questions. Only our imaginations can bring us to the edges of our understanding and then go further. Only our imaginations can fathom that which we do not yet know or have not yet experienced. This imagination is a gift that humans alone possess in our biological world. It's what separates us from the rest of our partners on earth, and it is what makes us sometimes forget that we aren't godlike. This gift, and like all gifts, it can also be a curse, is one thing that makes humans human and forces us into that tension between heaven and earth. When Job was first written, likely in the 6th century before the Common Era, about 2,700 years ago, the second set of questions asked here would have seemed way beyond possibility. They are deeper than the depths below. Their measure is longer than the earth and wider than the sea. Those questions were so far beyond the limits of knowledge then. But now I can tell you that the average depth of the sea is 12,100 feet. And the deepest part is 35,876 feet deep. The circumference of the earth is 24,902 miles. What was once beyond the scope of knowledge, beyond imagination, can now be known because of our imagination. In the last few millennia, since the book of Job was written, our imaginations have pushed beyond the limits of our knowledge, and then knowledge continued to catch up. We are only able to create that which we first imagine. As the playwright George Bernard Shaw said, imagination is the beginning of creation. You imagine what you desire, You will what you imagine, and at last you create what you will. What we imagine has the potential to become realized. And we all here and everywhere are the beneficiaries of our ancestors' imaginations. So much goodness and health and safety and art and music are the product of generations of imagination turned to creation. Somebody had to imagine the thing that we now call a cello. They had to imagine a thing we call the organ. They had to imagine what it meant to sing together, and then somebody imagined and wrote it, and then they all imagined and put it together. So many layers. And we are also carrying the burden of our predecessors' imaginations. So much oppression and cruelty and destruction has come about because of the ways that humans have imagined controlling other humans and holding power and taking from. So, like humanity, imagination is not an absolute moral good. It is powerful, and it can be used for good or for harm. And this place, this community, this congregation is also the beneficiary of generations of imaginations that have created this church, and we have now inherited it, and we are now the stewards of it. We are able to eat the fruits that have been given to us, and we have to decide what no longer works. And we have the opportunity, the obligation, to be the imaginative ancestors that our descendants need us to be. We are called to live into the gift of our humanness and imagine a better world to give to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. To imagine and then work to create. So what can you imagine? What can you imagine? What could you imagine that could create the goodness that our communities, that our world needs? What can you imagine that might begin to undo so much of the brokenness that we have been handed? What can you imagine? And then how do you stop yourself from discarding your imaginations? When have you imagined something and then told yourself that it's probably impossible and to forget about it? What stories do you tell yourself that unfortunately convince you that your imagination is not worthy? It seems to be a cultural condition of ours that we diminish imagination, or at least segment it off to being the responsibility of children and artists. We sometimes act as if imagination is false, or pretend, or useless. We choose to devote ourselves to the pragmatic and the measurable, as if all that is worthwhile is only what we already have. Science is no exception to the gifts of imagination. Nothing new can be discovered without the imagination to spur the exploration. Astronomer Carl Sagan speaks to this when he says, "Imagination will often carry us to worlds that never were, but without it, we go nowhere." So I ask us to reconceive imagination, to alter it the way it sits in our lives. Instead of being flimsy, imagination is bold. Imagination takes bravery. Imagination takes some work and practice and knowledge. To imagine something new is to take all that we have been given, all of our God-given human gifts and put them into the creation of something that has not yet been. Our imagination can be used to be co-creators with God, with the intention of building the beloved community that God calls us to build. This is not for other people to do. This is for you. This is for us. You are capable. We are capable. We are all equipped with imagination. It's what makes you not a dolphin. It's what makes us human. It's one of our God-given gifts that puts us into that tension we named before. Imagination is what differentiates us from the rest of biological life. Why wouldn't we use this gift? To imagine doesn't mean that everything will just happen. We still need to do the work to make everyone in our communities experience the unending love that God promises us all. We still need to do the work of breaking down the oppressive systems that still cage all of us in some way or another. We still need to solve a whole lot of practical problems, but imagination is where it begins. Imagination can be exciting and playful and hopeful. Nothing can be created if it's not imagined first. So what can you imagine? What can we imagine together? How can we be bold and brave and imagined for a hoped-for future? And how can we all together encourage each other so that this church, this community, can be fertile soil for all these imaginations? You have a place to put them. You have a place to try them out. God is found within every single one of us and connected, and the connecting sinew between us all. We are both finite biological creatures and have the gifts of God. And in that important and life-giving tension, in that space of hope and possibility of what could be, what can you imagine? What can you imagine? What can we imagine? And then go forth and do it. And we'll do it together. May it be so.